The road to I do, medieval dating, sort of asterisk so. You're living in the Middle Ages, and you think you've found the one. Maybe they caught your eye at the village fair. Maybe you've shared some hay bale gossip at church. Maybe your parents already picked them out for you when you were still in diapers. Either way, congratulations. You're not quite dating, because in the medieval world, dating didn't really exist. There were no romantic strolls in the park. No flowers. No candle-lit dinners. No awkward what are we? Conversations. The concept of dating for love was, well, suspicious. At best, it was seen as a frivolous waste of time. At worst, it was dangerous, because love made people do dumb things, like marry below their station, or say no to a politically important marriage, or not bring a big enough dowry. Scandalous. Let's break down how people in the medieval world actually found a spouse, or, more often, were assigned one. Option 1. The family match. Most common way to end up married in medieval Europe was pretty simple. Your family arranged it. Marriage wasn't really about love. It was about alliances, land, money, and making sure you didn't die alone in a mud hut. Your parents, or be even your lord if you were a peasant living on a manor, would help set you up. Not romantically, of course. Just practically. Do they have a strong back? Do they own a few chickens? Do they come from a family that doesn't owe us a pig? Checks all the boxes. Let's call the priest. For noble families, the stakes were even higher. A good marriage could secure political power, inheritance rights, and a peaceful alliance. A bad marriage could literally start a war. So, whether you were a duke or a dirt farmer, love came second, or third, or not at all. Option 2. The community gossips help if your family wasn't quite the matchmaking type. Don't worry, your neighbors had opinions, and they loved to meddle. In smaller villages, everybody knew everybody, and if someone noticed you were chatting with that one girl by the well every morning, the rumors would spread faster than butter on warm bread. Local priests, elders, and even town criers sometimes helped push people together. They liked order, they liked marriages, and they really liked babies, because more babies meant more ties, more workers, and more people to baptize. Option 3. Fairs, festivals, and flirting. Occasionally, there was actual opportunity. Big festivals, harvest celebrations, and religious holidays were prime time for courtship. Picture this. People from nearby villages gather in one place. There's dancing, there's mead, there's roasted meat on a stick. It's the closest thing to Tinder the medieval world had, except everyone's watching, and your parents might be behind you whispering, pick that one. She churns butter like a dream. Young people might sneak glances, swap ribbons, or even try a bit of awkward flirting, which, in medieval terms, meant something like, fair maiden, your petticoat is free of chicken droppings. A rare and wondrous sight. Swoon, letters, songs, and other courtly nonsense among the nobility. There was a whole thing called courtly love. It was all very dramatic and poetic. Writing sappy love letters, composing songs, maybe even wearing a lady's token into battle. But here's the thing. It wasn't usually about actual marriage. Courtly love was more like a fancy emotional affair, often outside of marriage. It was admired, but not necessarily expected to end in a wedding. So while peasants might be negotiating over goats, nobles were writing poems about each other's eyebrows. Still, neither group was likely to say, let's date for a few years and see where this goes. How old were people getting married? You're not going to like this answer. Because medieval people got married young, like, really young, especially girls. Legally, the church said girls could marry at 12 and boys at 14, but in practice, it varied. Noble families often arranged marriages early to lock in alliances, but the couple might not live together until they were a little older. Peasant families were a bit more relaxed. Kids were expected to work, not wed. Most peasants married in their late teens or early 20s, once they could contribute to a household. Still, by modern standards, super young, and not exactly romantic. The role of consent, yes, it existed. Here's a surprising twist. The medieval church did care about consent, at least in theory. Canon law said both the man and the woman had to freely say yes for a marriage to be valid. Without it, the whole thing could be nullified. Of course, real life was messy. Families pressured kids. Lords pressured peasants. Consent sometimes looked more like nod and don't get whipped. But if a case went to court, and yes, they had marriage courts, the church would ask, did they both agree? Were there witnesses? If not, the whole marriage could be called off. Big drama. Trial marriages, sort of, in some parts of Europe. Especially among peasants, they were traditions that sort of resembled modern dating. Kind of. For example, there's evidence that couples might cohabit for a while before officially marrying. This wasn't super common, and the church hated it. But it happened. In some areas, they do a hand-fasting ceremony, where a couple would pledge themselves to each other temporarily. Like a test run. So yes, they were early versions of let's see how this goes, but they weren't exactly romantic comedies. More like survival comedies. So how do you know you're getting married? At some point, someone, probably your dad or your lord or the priest, would say, it's time. The deal was done. The sheep were counted, the dowry negotiated, the contract signed. If you could read, love had very little to do with it, but that didn't mean people were unhappy. Some marriages turned out okay. People learned to live together, raise kids, share bread. Others, not so much, but either way, once the matchmaking was over, the planning began. And that's where we're headed next. Who could get married and who couldn't? Alright. So, you found someone, or someone found them for you. Maybe there was a fair. Maybe there was a dowry. Maybe someone just said, you're marrying that guy. But before you break out the meat and roasted goose, there's an important question. Are you even allowed to get married? In the medieval world, getting married wasn't just a matter of saying I do and kissing in front of a priest. Oh no, there were rules. So many rules. Church rules, feudal rules, local customs, and just plain nosy people who liked telling you what to do. Let's break down who got to tie the knot, and who got stuck sitting on the sidelines. Rule number 1. You gotta be Christian. Sorry, not sorry. The medieval church ran the marriage show. And that meant the church only recognized Christian marriages. If you were Christian, congrats. You're in the club. If not, well, good luck. Jewish communities had their own marriage traditions and followed their own laws. Same for Muslims in places like medieval Spain. But for everyone else under church rule, and that was a lot of Europe, your marriage didn't count unless it followed Christian customs. No priest, no blessings, no communion. Then in the church's eyes, it was like playing house. Cute, but unofficial. And being officially married mattered. Not just spiritually, but legally. Without it, your kids could be labeled illegitimate, and you could lose your land. Not great. Rule number 2. You had to be free to marry. That sounds obvious, right? But free to marry had layers. Let's say you're a widow or widower. You're free. You can remarry. In fact, many people did, especially after plagues, battles, or childbirth complications. But let's say you were already secretly married to someone else. And then tried to marry a second person. Now we've got a problem. Bigamy was a sin and a crime. If it got found out, you'd be hauled off to court, shamed in public, or worse, excommunicated. Also, if you'd taken holy vows, like becoming a monk, nun, or priest, then you were not free to marry anymore. You were spiritually married to God. The church took that very seriously. Rule number 3. You had to be the right age. We touched on this in chapter 1. But let's dig deeper. Canon law said the minimum age was 12 for girls and 14 for boys. But that just meant you could be married in theory. In practice, many marriages, especially among peasants, didn't happen until the late teens or early 20s. Still, marrying young was common, and weird by today's standards. A 12-year-old bride today would lead to an arrest. Back then, just another Tuesday. The church technically required both parties to be old enough to understand what marriage meant. But, let's be real, if your parents said yes, that often counted as good enough. Rule number 4. You couldn't be too closely related. Here's where it gets complicated. The church really didn't want cousins marrying cousins, or second cousins, or third cousins. Basically, if you shared a great-grandma, someone might raise an eyebrow. This rule was called consanguinity, and it was taken very seriously, especially among nobles, where everyone was sort of related already. Of course, rich people found workarounds, like paying the church for a dispensation, a kind of holy permission slip. Yes, we're cousins, but here's some gold. Can we still get married? But if you skip that step and the relationship was discovered later, your whole marriage could be invalidated and your kids declared illegitimate, which caused all kinds of inheritance drama. So yeah, medieval genealogy was more important than you'd think. Rule number 5. You needed consent. Mostly weirdly enough, even in an age of arranged marriages, consent was required, at least by the church. Both parties had to say yes freely. If someone said I do under pressure, like with a sword pointed at their nose, the church could rule that the marriage wasn't valid. Even if your parents arranged everything, the priest was supposed to ask you if you agreed. Now, how often was this followed? Depends. For peasants, there was often a bit more wiggle room. People actually did sometimes marry for love, if it didn't mess with money or land. But for nobles, consent was usually a formality. You might be 14, your future spouse might be 40, and your father might be watching with arms crossed, who couldn't get married. Now let's look at the people who got left out of the medieval marriage game. 1. Priests, nuns, and monks. Once you joined the church, you gave up marriage. Forever, period. Even if you changed your mind later. Tough luck, Brother Thomas. 2. Serfs. Without permission. If you were a serf, legally tied to the land, you might need your lord's permission to marry, especially if your future spouse was from a different manor. Because marrying out meant losing a worker. Some lords even charged a fee called merchant when a daughter got married, kind of like a medieval exit tax. Super romantic. 3. People with disabilities or illnesses. People with visible disabilities or mental illnesses were often excluded from marriage. The church might question whether they could give proper consent, and society just wasn't kind. 4. People too poor to marry. Even poverty could get in the way. You needed enough resources to start a household, land, tools, animals, or at least a job. No money, no spouse, unless you were lucky and love conquered all. But don't count on it. So, who did get married? Despite all the rules, most people in medieval Europe did get married eventually. It was seen as part of life, like working, eating bread, and dying of something weird by age 5. And once you were married, you were part of the system. You made babies, you worked the land, you paid taxes, you added to the social order. Love wasn't always the reason, but companionship, survival, stability. Those were good enough. And if you made it through all the rules, blessings, and cousin checks, well, congratulations, you could start planning the wedding. Which brings us to next time. Betrothal, the pre-game marriage. So, you've passed the medieval marriage checklist. You're not already married, not a monk, not too poor, and, lucky you, not closely related to your future spouse. The stars have aligned, and now, it's time for the next big step. Betrothal. This was like getting engaged, but more intense. In medieval times, a betrothal wasn't just a cute promise with a ring and an Instagram post. It was legally binding, socially serious, and church approved. In some places, it was so official that breaking it could lead to a lawsuit, or at least a lot of angry letters written in fancy handwriting. Let's take a closer look at what this pre-marriage phase really looked like: contracts, dowries, hand-holding, and all. What even is a betrothal? A betrothal, sometimes called a troth-plight, was a formal agreement to marry, not just a "yeah, we'll probably do it eventually," but a full-on, public commitment. There were usually witnesses, sometimes gifts, and occasionally a priest involved. It wasn't the wedding itself, but it was a promise that the wedding would definitely happen. Think of it like a pre-wedding handshake. Only it might involve livestock, property documents, and at least one relative looking extremely serious. Types of betrothal. Medieval scholars, and they had time for this kind of thing, categorized betrothals into two types. 1. Sponsalia de presentithis was a present tense betrothal, like, "I do take you to be my spouse." If you said this, the church might treat it as basically a full marriage, especially if it was followed by certain activities. 2. Sponsalia de futurithis. One was future tense. "I will take you to be my spouse." This was the standard engagement, still binding, but not a marriage yet, unless you jumped the gun and consummated it. Oops, words mattered a lot. If you said the wrong phrase in the wrong tense, you could accidentally marry someone at the village fair. So yeah, be careful how you flirted. Public promises. Private drama. Betrothal was usually announced publicly at the local church or town square, because medieval people loved other people's business. Everyone wanted to know who's getting married. How much is the dowry? Is she too young? Is he weird? Did they meet at a pig auction? Gossip? Levels were high, but the public announcement served a purpose. It gave anyone with a legal objection a chance to speak up. Like, "Wait, isn't he already married to my cousin?" Or, "She's promised to someone in the next village." So, in a way, it was kind of like medieval Facebook. Once it's posted, it's official. The dowry. Love in a treasure chest. Let's talk dowries. The stuff a bride's family gave to the groom's family as part of the marriage deal. Dowries weren't just about money. They could include land or livestock, household items, blankets, pots, goats, clothes, or jewelry. Cold, hard silver coins if you were lucky. The idea was to help the new couple start their household. But in practice, dowries were often a huge bargaining chip. A big dowry could land your daughter a better husband. A small dowry, well, maybe the guy's nose wasn't that crooked. And yes, sometimes grooms gave gifts to the bride's family, too, called a bride price. But in Christian Europe, dowries were more common. There were entire legal documents drawn up about this stuff. Who owed what, when it had to be paid. What happened if someone died before the wedding? Lawyers probably loved it. Sealing the deal. Tokens of trothance. The betrothal was agreed upon. It was time to seal the deal. Not with a kiss to scandalous, but with tokens. These were symbolic items exchanged between the couple. Think a ring, a belt, or sash, a small knife. Romantic, right? A piece of cloth, like a veil or glove. Sometimes, the groom would give the bride a coin or even a cup of wine. In some traditions, they'd break a piece of bread together. All to say, this is happening. The church liked these tokens. They made it clear something official had taken place. So, if anyone tried to back out later, those tokens could be used as evidence in court. Yep, your ex could take you to court over a belt. Could you call it off? Betrothals weren't forever, but breaking one wasn't easy. If both parties agreed to end it, they usually could. But it wasn't without consequences. Gifts might have to be returned, dowries refunded, awkward reputations slightly bruised, and if you broke it without a good reason, you could get sued. In some places, betrothal breakers had to do public penance, like standing outside church with no shoes, or donating money to the poor, or just enduring the pointed looks of every grandma in town. So yeah, Think twice before ghosting your medieval fiancé. The medieval soft launch in some areas, especially in parts of Britain and Scandinavia, couples did a thing called hand fasting, a ceremony where they literally tied their hands together and promised to marry within a year. This was kind of like a trial marriage. If they didn't go through with the wedding, the hand fasting still counted for something. And if they did consummate the relationship, boom, the church might just say, "Congrats. You're already married." It was informal, but still serious, and it gave couples a little wiggle room to get to know each other before going full marriage mode. Still, your village priest probably didn't love it. He preferred things neat and church approved. A lot of waiting, but not too much once. Betrothed couples usually waited a few months to a year before the wedding. This gave time to prepare the household, gather dowry items, settle legal details, plan the feast, or find a pig big enough for it. It was also a chance for everyone to emotionally prepare, because let's be honest, in many cases, the couple had barely spent time together. They might not even like each other yet, but the betrothal gave them a little breathing room. A time to get used to the idea, a countdown to the next phase of life. And when that day finally came, when the contracts were signed, the goat was groomed, the relatives all invited, it was time to plan the big event. So grab your best tunic. Dust off your nicest wooden spoon, because the medieval wedding is just around the corner. Planning the big day. Spoiler, you didn't do much. So, you're officially betrothed. Promises have been made. Maybe you got a knife as a gift. Maybe your future in-laws are eyeing your family's goat like it's already theirs. Either way, it's happening. The wedding is coming. Now, you might be picturing dress shopping, cake tasting, and color-coded seating charts. Yeah, no. In medieval Europe, wedding planning was a whole different beast, and unless you were rich and powerful, you didn't have much say in it, especially if you were the bride. Let's break down what planning a wedding actually looked like in the Middle Ages, and why, most of the time, people just showed up and hoped for the best. Who actually planned the wedding? Short answer, not you. Longer answer, it depended on your social class. If you were a noble, your parents or guardians handled pretty much everything. Marriage was a business deal, and your wedding was just the contract signing ceremony, with food. There might be a priest, a bishop, a dozen squabbling cousins, and maybe even your overlord. Oh, and everything had to be timed just right, to avoid clashing with harvest, Lent, or your cousin's execution. Priorities. If you were a peasant, planning was more casual, but still out of your hands. The village elders, local priest, or your lord steward might be involved. Your parents or extended family were calling the shots, especially if they'd chipped in for your dowry or helped arrange the match. Planning often meant borrowing extra mugs and hoping it didn't rain. Basically, the bride and groom were often just there, looking polite, maybe nervous. Definitely not in control. Pick a date. Any church-approved date. Weddings couldn't just happen whenever you wanted. The church had rules. Shocking. I know. Certain times of year were considered bad for weddings, including Lent 40 days before Easter, Advent, weeks before Christmas, certain feast days, any time when fasting or repenting was expected. Church didn't want you getting married while everyone was supposed to be sad and hungry? Fair enough. So, couples usually got married during late spring or early summer, after planting season, early autumn, after harvest, but before it got too cold to party, or on feast days like St. John's Day or Michaelmas. Bonus. Built-in entertainment. Sunday was the favorite day for weddings, because everyone was already at church. 2 birds, 1 priest. Location. Most medieval weddings, especially by the 12th century onward, were expected to happen at the chariap. Not inside the church, at the door. Why? Because the ceremony was seen as a public vow, something everyone should be able to witness. Getting married at the front door was like standing on a medieval stage and shouting, "Look, we're doing it right." Some peasants might marry in their homes or even fields, especially in remote areas. And earlier in the Middle Ages, weddings were often private family affairs, without a priest at all. But as church power grew, the church door ceremony became the gold standard. And if you skipped it, people talked. What did you need to prepare? Not much, honestly, but here are a few essentials. 1. A priest kind of important. The priest was there too. Ask the couple if they consented. Bless the union. Sometimes give a sermon about not being terrible to each other. No priest. The marriage might still be valid, but it wouldn't look good. Point 2. Witnesses. These weren't just decoration. Witnesses were proof the marriage happened, especially important in case of future disputes. Like if your spouse ran off and claimed the marriage never happened. The local baker who watched your vows would say otherwise. 3. The ring. Optional rings weren't always used, but they were growing in popularity, especially among wealthier folks. If you could afford one, it might be iron for peasants, silver or gold for nobles, decorated with simple carvings or a religious symbol. Fun fact, the church eventually said the ring should go on the fourth finger of the left hand, because they believed a vein ran straight to the heart. Sweet, right? Also not medically true. But hey, it's romantic. What about the bride's role? Ah yes, the bride. What was her role in wedding planning? Mostly, stand there and look agreeable. She might get a say in what she wore. Maybe, but most other decisions were made by her father, her priest, or her future husband. The bride's main job was to bring a dowry, say yes in front of witnesses, and hopefully not cry too much if she didn't know the groom very well. Empowering. No, historically accurate. Yep. Clothing, decorations, and vibes. We'll get into wedding fashion next chapter. But here's a sneak peek. There were no white dresses. That's a Victorian thing. People thus wore their best clothes, often the nicest thing they owned. Rich folks might wear bright colors and jewels, while peasants wore freshly scrubbed tunics and shoes, if they had them. Decorations were minimal. Maybe some flowers, maybe a ribbon or two. If you were really fancy, you might scatter herbs or lay down rushes to walk on. There weren't bouquets or flower girls or choreographed entrances. Just a lot of people standing around, trying to look solemn and not fall asleep in the sun. Feast planning, aka the real star of the show. Let's be honest, the feast was the most exciting part. People came for the food, the drink, and the chance to dance badly in public. Who planned the feast? For nobles, professional stewards, cooks, servants, and a lot of nervous scribes writing down menus. For peasants, the whole village pitched in. Aunt Hilda brought a pie, someone donated a chicken. You borrowed 10 extra bowls from your neighbor, and hoped no one noticed. If you were lucky, the feast lasted all day. If you were really lucky, it didn't end in a drunken brawl. So did the couple help with any of this? Not really. Most of the time, the bride and groom were just present. They might help gather food or make their own clothes, but the planning, that was someone else's job. Which, honestly, might not be the worst thing. No spreadsheets, no arguments, over seating charts, no DJ disasters. Just show up. Say yes, eat pie, done. And when the day finally arrived, when the people gathered, the priest stood at the ready, and someone remembered to bring the wine. That's when the real ceremony began. Ready to see what actually happened at the wedding. What to wear, medieval wedding fashion *. So, the wedding day is finally here. The priest is polishing his best holy words. The neighbors are whispering. The pig is roasting. The church door is swept clean. And you've got to figure out what to wear. Now, if you're imagining a medieval bride gliding down the aisle in a flowing white dress, clutching a bouquet, maybe wearing a veil covered in sparkly beads, sorry, that's a Victorian fantasy. In the Middle Ages, wedding fashion was a bit more practical. You wore what you had. Maybe you jazzed it up a little But unless you were super wealthy, the goal wasn't to look like a princess. The goal was to look clean, respectable, and, if possible, like you didn't roll out of the pigsty that morning. Let's break it down. White wasn't a thing yet. This surprises a lot of people. So let's say it clearly. Medieval brides didn't wear white. White dresses became fashionable only in the 19th century, thanks to Queen Victoria. Before that, white was actually kind of a weird color to wear. It showed dirt, it didn't dye well, and it definitely didn't say wealth unless you had a team of laundresses at your disposal. Instead, medieval brides and grooms wore their best clothes, whatever that happened to be. Colors were in, especially red, blue, and gold if you had money or connections. Your wedding outfit might feature rich, vibrant colors, like red, symbolizing passion, power, and good fortune; blue, associated with purity and the Virgin Mary; a church favorite; green, thought to bring fertility; wink wink; gold or yellow, for wealth and status. Deed fabric was expensive, so bold colors were a big flex. The brighter the garment, the more people assumed you were doing okay financially. Subtlety, not a medieval priority. Poorer folks mostly wore natural tones, browns, creams, dull greens, but they'd still try to find their cleanest, nicest outfit for the occasion. Layers, layers, layers. Forget sleek suits or strapless gowns. Medieval outfits were all about layers, even in summer, even if you were sweating buckets. For women, a typical wedding outfit might include a shift or chemise, basic linen underlayer, a kirtle, a sort of fitted dress, an overgown or surcoat, often sleeveless and open at the sides, a belt, sometimes with a decorative purse or keys, headdress or veil. Especially if you were already of marriageable age. For men, wedding fashion could include a tunic, belted at the waist, hose, tight-fitting leggings. Yes, really a cloak, if the weather called for it, a cap, hood, or even a Johnny feathered hat if you were feeling extra. On shoes, simple leather flats or turn shoes. No heels, no sneakers, just something to keep the mud off your feet. The fancier the person, the fancier the threads. If you were a noble, wedding fashion was next level. Your garments might be made of silk, velvet, or fine wool trimmed with fur, gold thread, or embroidered. Crest, you might wear a circlet or crown. Your belt could be jeweled, and your cloak might be long enough to drag dramatically on the fleur. Also, nobles often had multiple outfits, one for the ceremony, one for the feast, and maybe one for showing off in portraits later. Gotta make the in-laws jealous. Symbolic touches, not just for style. Some clothing choices weren't about fashion, they were about meaning. For example, a blue sash or veil could signal the bride's purity. Wearing red might be a nod to fertility and strength. Garters, lace, and knotted cords could be included as symbols of unity and binding. In some regions, couples literally tied their sleeves together or wore matching ribbons to show their bond. Think of it like medieval friendship bracelets, but for marriage. Veils, wreaths, and hair stuff. A bride's hair was a big deal. Unmarried women often wore their hair loose or braided. Married women were expected to cover their hair, a symbol of modesty and respectability. For a wedding, a young bride might wear her hair down one last time, often with a flower crown, ribbon, or a thin veil. In some places, especially in Northern Europe, brides wore a wreath of herbs or flowers, sometimes with symbolic plants like rosemary for remembrance, rue for protection, myrtle for love and luck. Basically, your head was your Pinterest board. Jewelry, maybe, if you had any. Jewelry wasn't super common for the average peasant, but if you had a family brooch, ring, or necklace, the wedding was the time to wear it. Nobles, on the other hand, loved to sparkle. Gold chains, rings, earrings, jeweled belts, all fair game. Some noble brides even wore heirlooms passed down for generations. This sapphire came from Great-Aunt Matilda, who once married a man with 12 pigs, borrowed and blue. Not quite at that old rhyme. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. is a much later invention, but the spirit of it existed in medieval weddings. People did borrow clothes, especially if they didn't own anything nice. Hand-me-downs were common. So was stitching a blue thread into a dress for luck. And as for something old, honestly, most of your wardrobe probably counted. Dressing the groom? Yes, he had to look nice. Grooms were expected to dress respectably, though no one expected them to be fashion icons. A clean tunic neatly tied, hose, maybe a cloak or hat, and if he was trying to impress, a new belt or fancy Nefeno tuxedos. No boutonnieres. Just a solid effort not to look like he'd rolled out of the stables 5 minutes ago. Bonus points if his outfit matched the bride's in color, not because it was planned, but because they probably wore what they already owned. Kids, animals, and everyone else if kids were involved. As pages, helpers, or miniature dancers, they were dressed up too. Usually in scaled-down versions of adult clothes, adorable. If itchy, animals, well, if your family goat was coming to the feast, maybe she got a flower garland. Who's to say? The big picture in the end. Medieval wedding fashion was about 3 things. Looking your best within your means, showing your status if you had one, signaling your readiness for the next chapter in life. You didn't need a wedding stylist, or a dress code, or matching groomsmen outfits, just a clean tunic, a sprig of rosemary, and maybe, just maybe, a ribbon that didn't smell like onions. The church says yes. Religious rules and ceremonies *, so you've got your wedding outfit on. You've tied your belt just right. Maybe you've got a sprig of rosemary in your hair. The pig's still roasting. The neighbors are definitely still whispering. But before you say I do, you've got one more very important person to deal with, the church, because in medieval Europe, God was always invited to the wedding, whether you wanted him there or not. Marriage, a holy sacrament. Eventually, in the early Middle Ages, marriage wasn't really a big church thing. People got married in their homes, in the fields, maybe in front of a crowd if they were feeling fancy. The church kind of shrugged. But by the 12th century, that changed. Big time. The church declared marriage a holy sacrament, right up there with baptism and communion. Now, it wasn't just a legal contract or a family arrangement. It was a spiritual event, a religious bond, a union blessed by God, and it came with rules. So many rules. Step 1. Consent. There's a fun surprise. In medieval Christian marriages, consent was king. Both the bride and groom had to say yes willingly. No. Seriously, the church was very clear. Both people had to freely agree to the marriage. Without that, the whole thing could be considered invalid. Now, in real life, did that always happen? Let's just say powerful families sometimes guided young people into agreeing, but at least in theory, you couldn't be forced. Even noble women, who were often pawns in political alliances, were technically required to say the magic words themselves, and those magic words were something like, I take you as my wedded wife, husband. Say it clearly, and the priest could move things along. Step 2. The priest and maybe the porch. By the high Middle Ages, a proper wedding was supposed to be public and church approved. That meant a priest present, a blessing, a church building, or at least the churchyard. In fact, a lot of weddings happened on the church porch, not inside. Why? Because marriage wasn't yet considered a mass event. It was holy, but not sacred in the same way as communion. Also, porches were convenient. Everyone could see. It made things public, and you weren't dragging muddy boots down the nave. Step 3. Witnesses and publication of bans. The church wanted to avoid awkward surprises, like, say, a groom already having a secret wife in another village. So they introduced bans. Public announcements of the upcoming marriage, usually made 3 Sundays in a row. These bans gave people time to object. Maybe someone knew a secret. Maybe the couple were cousins. Maybe someone was already married. This was your chance to say, I don't think this is allowed. No bans equals suspicious marriage. Also, you needed witnesses. The more, The better. Marriage wasn't meant to be private. It was everyone's business, especially if there was a dispute later. What actually happened during the ceremony? Here's a pretty typical church wedding sequence by the 13th or 14th century. Gathering. At the church porch, friends and family gather outside. The priest stands by with his book of blessings. Declaration of intent. The priest asks if both parties consent. Do you take this woman? Etc. Exchange of vows. The couple says the magic words, usually in Latin, but sometimes in the local language. Blessing of the ring. If there was a ring, not everyone had one. The priest would bless it and hand it over. The groom usually gave it to the bride. Engagement rings weren't really a thing yet. Handfasting, or joining of hands. Some ceremonies involve tying the couple's hands together with a ribbon or cloth, symbolic of their new bond. Final blessing. The priest would offer prayers for a happy, fertile, and hopefully sin-free marriage. Mass optional. Wealthier or more religious families might then move inside for a full mass. About that ring. Wedding rings existed in the Middle Ages, but they weren't universal. Gold rings were expensive, and peasants might skip them entirely. If you did have one, the groom would slide it onto the bride's finger, usually the third finger on the left hand, just like today. Why? Because medieval folks believed that finger had a vein that led straight to the heart. Spoiler, it doesn't, but it was a cute idea. Could you get married without a priest? Weirdly, yes. There was a thing called a clandestine marriage. That meant the couple exchanged vows privately. No priest, no church, no witnesses. As long as they both consented, the church technically considered it valid, but it was super frowned upon. Priests hated it. Families hated it. It caused legal headaches. By the 16th century, laws were passed to try to stop it altogether. Still, if you and your sweetheart were in a hurry, or trying to avoid angry parents, it was an option. A risky one, but an option. Special church rules and odd bands. Want to marry your cousin, your third cousin, your ex-step-brother's aunt. The church had opinions. You couldn't marry someone too closely related, often defined as within 7 degrees of kinship. Basically, everyone in your village. You couldn't marry during Lent or Advent, because those were seasons of fasting, not feasting. You couldn't marry someone who'd taken a vow of chastity, like monks or nuns. Though, sometimes, people did anyway. Basically, the church had a long list of nonas, and you were expected to follow them, or get special permission. Weddings equals holy, but also social. While the church wanted to make marriage a sacred thing, they also knew it was a social event. There was always a tug-of-war between religious formality and festive celebration. That's why many priests would bless the couple, then promptly join the wedding feast. After all, what better way to celebrate a new union than with roast meat, too much ale, someone falling asleep in the butter churn? In conclusion, church weddings were a bit of everything. They were religious ceremonies, legal contracts, social events, slightly awkward porch gatherings, but most of all, they were a public promise. In front of God, family, friends, and nosy neighbors, you are saying, yes, one choose this person, for better or worse, until plague do us part. The wedding day. What actually happened? So, it's finally the big day. You said your awkward goodbyes to single life. Your betrothal has been announced for 3 Sundays straight. The bands are done. The church porch has been swept. There's bread baking somewhere in the background. Someone's already had too much ale. Let's walk through a typical medieval wedding day, from start to finish. Some parts were sacred, others were chaotic. Most were noisy. All of it, very, very medieval. The night before, jitters, gossip, and a packed house. If you think today's weddings are stressful, imagine planning one in a world without seating charts, electricity, or indoor plumbing. In the countryside, weddings were community events. That meant neighbors packed into your house, sleeping on benches, floors, hay, and possibly on top of the pig pen if space ran out. Guests came early and stayed late, sometimes for days. If you were a noble, it was even more chaotic. Horses needed stabling, cloaks needed dusting, and your uncle probably brought 6 musicians without warning. The bride, she likely didn't sleep much. Between prayers, family drama, and layers of itchy linen, she was lucky to get a wink. Morning. Get up, get dressed, get blessed. The day usually began early, like rooster crowing early. First stop, church, or at least the church porch. The ceremony took place before noon. Why? Because marriage was a sacrament, and those weren't to be rushed or shoved into the evening like some tavern gathering. Before heading out, the bride would be dressed by female relatives or attendants. The groom would be nervously adjusting his belt and checking his purse for coins. There were always coins to hand out. Any livestock involved in the dowry, cows, goats, geese, might be bleeding outside. A weird but very medieval touch. The procession. Let's walk to church. Weddings often involved processions, like little parades. The bride, her family, and friends would walk to the church or be carted there if they were rich. People sang songs, clapped, played flutes, or thus yelled things like good luck and don't trip. If you were rich enough, someone might carry a banner or a family crest. If you were poor, someone might bang 2 pots together for dramatic effect. Either way, it was a show. The groom often arrived separately. In some places, he waited outside the church to greet the bride and lead her in, which was either romantic or nerve-wracking, depending on the weather and the bride's opinion of him. The ceremony, say the words, get the blessing. Wedding ceremony itself was short but sacred. As we covered in Chapter 6, this took place on the church porch, out in the open, in public view. The priest would ask the couple if they consented, witness their vows, possibly bless a ring, pray for fertility, prosperity, and not dying too soon, remind everyone that God was watching. Medieval priests didn't usually say you may now kiss the bride, but they might have given you a nod and said, go forth and multiply. Some noble weddings included a mass inside the church afterward, but that was optional, and sometimes boring. The exit, tossing stuff and cheering loudly once the vows were done. The crowd cheered, sang, and maybe threw a few things, not rice, but dried herbs for luck, nuts for fertility, coins for fun, breadcrumbs. For some reason people wanted to see the couple happy, or at least not cursed, so there was lots of noise and blessing and laughter. No matter the weather or the social class. Feast time, bring on the meat after the church bit. Everyone headed to the wedding feast. If you were a noble, this could mean several long wooden tables, roasted meats, dishes piled high with fruit, nuts, pastries, goblets of wine or meat, a juggler or musician, or that one cousin who always tells dirty jokes. If you were a peasant, the menu was more like barley bread, turnips, stew, ale, lots of it, maybe a roast chicken. If the family had saved up it, no matter the status, food was central. Weddings were one of the few times when people ate until they were full. There might not be seconds the next day, but on wedding day, you feasted. Toasts, songs, and probably a fart joke. Medieval wedding toasts weren't written on note cards. They weren't rehearsed. People just stood up and shouted blessings like, to many sons, may your goats never wander. Don't mess it up. Songs were sung, especially by minstrels if you could afford one. They sang ballads, love stories, or silly rhymes. Fart jokes, honestly, they were very popular. Chaucer didn't make that up. Someone would always embarrass the bride or tease the groom. It was all in good fun. Mostly dancing, or what passed for it. People danced, but not ballroom style. Think more like circles and stomping, hand holding and turning chain style dances across the courtyard. The music was often played on lutes, fiddles, or recorders. And yes, people probably tripped, but that was part of the charm. For peasants, dancing often continued well after dark. For nobles, there might be structured performances. Either way, someone probably sprained an ankle. The betting, yep, Still a thing as the feast wound down and candles burned low. The party reached its most awkward moment, the bedding ceremony. In many communities, the couple was led, sometimes literally dragged, to their bed. Guests might sing rude songs, women helped undress the bride, men helped undress the groom, the priest might bless the bed, and sometimes people stayed to watch them get in it. What you'd call romantic. But hey, it was tradition. It sealed the deal, and the sooner it was done, the sooner everyone else could go back to drinking. The day after, hangovers and gossip after all the singing, feasting, and bedding, what was left? Mostly, cleaning up, gossiping, a massive hangover, and a new couple trying to figure out how to share a bed in a drafty house. Sometimes gifts were exchanged, sometimes debts were settled, sometimes a pig escaped. But for the couple, life as husband and wife officially began. In summary, the wedding day was a whole thing. It was loud, joyful, full of food, faith, and flatulence, both sacred and silly. Medieval weddings weren't just about the couple, they were about community, family, and proving to the entire village that you were, indeed, now a legally and spiritually bound pair. Congratulations. You survived the day. Now comes the real challenge. Married life. Food, feasting, and getting very full. All right. The vows are done. The priest has blessed you. You've kissed awkwardly in front of your neighbors. Maybe someone cried. Maybe someone fell over in the church porch. Either way, it's time for what everyone was actually waiting for, the feast. Because what is a medieval wedding without a ridiculously large meal that lasts for hours or days, smells like roast meat and candle wax, and ends with someone asleep under a table? Let's dig in. Why the feast mattered so much in the Middle Ages. Wedding feasts weren't optional. They were expected, kind of like a public announcement that you were officially married, taken off the market, and now allowed to have sex without divine punishment. It wasn't just about celebration. A wedding feast was about showing off your status or pretending to have some, thinking the community, making alliances, and proving you could afford at least one day of abundant food. When peasants, who usually lived on gruel and hope, tried to scrape together something impressive for the big day, who got invited? Opening parenthesis, basically. Everyone. If you were a peasant, the whole village probably came. Weddings were community affairs, even if the couple barely liked some of the guests. If you were nobility, the list included family, friends, local lords, priests, musicians, stray knights passing through, and that one cousin who always brings to many. Dogs feasts range from small backyard gatherings to banquets with 300 people, and that's not including the cooks, servants, or random jugglers. The setup, not Pinterest perfect. There were no flower arrangements, no linen napkins, and certainly no seating charts with gold calligraphy. Here's what you got instead: long wooden tables, if you had them, benches or logs for seating, candles or torches for light, straw on the floor helped soak up spills and smells, lots of people shouting, singing, and spilling. A lithe bride and groom usually sat at the top table with the most important guests. Everyone else squeezed in wherever they could. The menu: bring on the meat and turnips. The food at medieval weddings ranged from wow, that's fancy, to what even is that? If you were noble, your wedding feast might include roasted swan or peacock with feathers added back on for flair, pies filled with meat, fish, or fruit, eel stew, a weird favorite, custards and tarts, spice wine or meat, a whole pig with an apple in its mouth. Of course, if you were a peasant, it was more like barley bread, porridge, or stew with actual meat, for once, onions, beans, turnips, a chicken, maybe even to ale, as much as you could carry. Fish was common too, especially if the feast landed on a religious day when meat was banned. Imagine getting married and eating boiled herring for your celebration meal. Not exactly romantic, but hey, it filled the belly. Food, status, and showing a feast weren't just about feeding people, they were about displaying power. The richer you were, the more dishes you served, courses you offered, animals you roasted, servants you had to carry stuff around. Some noble weddings served up to 5 or 6 courses, each with dozens of dishes. Think venison, fish, pastries, cheese, and sweet wines, over and over again. Sometimes, the food wasn't even meant to be eaten, it was just decorative. A giant pie might be filled with live birds that flew out when cut, or a roast boar might be painted gold. Medieval people loved a bit of edible drama, toasting, medieval cheers and jeers during the feast. People stood up to toast the couple. There weren't heartfelt speeches or PowerPoints, just good old-fashioned shouting, like, to the bride, may she bear many sons, to the groom, may he not drink himself into a ditch. May your cows never wander, and your house never burn. Des also sang songs and ballads, some sweet, some silly, and some downright inappropriate. If a minstrel was present, he'd earn his coin by strumming his lute and telling stories about love, war, or dragons that could probably be defeated with enough drinks, ale, wine, and a very slippery floor. You could not have a medieval wedding feast without copious amounts of alcohol. Even the poorest weddings had at least home-brewed ale. Nobles had barrels of beer, bottles of mead, honey wine, sweetened wine from France or Spain, and sometimes a rare glass of spiced claret. People drank early, often, and heavily. The more toasted you got, the more likely you were to sing loudly, dance badly, drop a roasted duck on the floor, fall asleep in a bread basket. A great time, really, entertainment, because eating isn't enough to keep the party going. People brought in minstrels, jugglers, dancers, puppet shows, yes. For adults, foolish characters who made jokes and insults. If you were really rich, you might even have a trained bear or a fire breather. If you were poor, your Uncle Dave probably juggled onions while standing on a barrel. Still a crowd pleaser. The point was, no silence allowed. Feasts were noisy, lively, chaotic, and fun, unless the food ran out. Then things got tense. The leftovers, or lack thereof, unlike today. Leftovers didn't last long. Most food was eaten on the spot, because no refrigeration. Hungry guests, hungry animals, hungry servants who got the scraps. Some noble households donated leftovers to the poor, which was considered pious and generous. But many guests simply ate until they couldn't move and then tried to smuggle food home in their sleeves. In summary, a medieval wedding feast was a feast. It was messy, loud, delicious sometimes, and the best meal many guests would have all year. People laughed, sang, toasted, and maybe passed out, all in celebration of two people who, let's be honest, probably didn't even choose each other. But for one night, everyone ate like royalty, and that was enough. Music, dancing, and maybe a fart joke. So, you've eaten enough meat to fall into a medieval food coma. You've toasted the couple 12 times. Someone spilled ale on the bride's sleeve. The groom is trying not to fall asleep in his own gravy. And now, it's time for music and dancing, because no medieval wedding was complete without a good stomp, a loud tune, and probably a joke about someone's backside. Let's step into the fun part. Minstrels, troubadours, and that one drunk uncle. Music at medieval weddings could be surprisingly lively, even if most people had the rhythm of a sack of potatoes. In noble households, you might get minstrels with lutes, harps, or fiddles, troubadours singing tales of love and heartbreak, wind instruments like recorders, pipes, or early bagpipes, and drummers banging away with joyful cows. If you were in a village setting, it might be a guy with a tambourine, someone hitting a pot with a spoon, and your cousin trying to whistle through a blade of grass. Did it sound good? Sometimes. Was it loud? Absolutely. Songs that made you laugh, cry, or blush. Music wasn't just background noise, it was part of the entertainment, and often carried stories, ballads about knights and ladies, songs praising the bride's beauty and the groom's luck, and funny tunes full of mildly inappropriate jokes. Medieval humor was earthy, a favorite theme, flatulence. Yes, really, people laughed at Farting during a dance, accidentally lifting your tunic to high songs with suspiciously vegetable-themed metaphor. See if you ever wondered if medieval folks were more mature than us. They weren't. Dance-like. Everyone's watching because they are dancing was a big part of wedding fun, and everyone was expected to join in. Even your grandma. There were no TikTok dances or coordinated routines. Instead, you had circle dances, holding hands, stepping around in a ring, line dances. Think medieval conga line partner dances, if you were lucky, or bold peasants mostly stuck to lively folk dances that involved jumping, clapping, spinning until you fell over, accidentally elbowing your neighbor in the face. Nobles did fancier, slower dances, more graceful, less sweaty, though even they slipped sometimes on spilled wine. The bride and groom's big moment. At some point, the bride and groom were pulled onto the floor. This could be a sweet, slow walk to music, an awkward shuffle, or full-on twirling if they were feeling brave. The crowd clapped, cheered, and maybe chanted mildly embarrassing rhymes. It was part tradition, part peer pressure. Refusing to dance was considered rude, unless you had gout or were literally passed out. Spontaneous performances. Show us what you got. Taunts. The wine flowed freely. You might get poetry recitations, some romantic, some weird impromptu singing, from guests who should not sing, juggling with apples, knives, or fire. If you were feeling spicy, mock duels with wooden spoons. One guy might stand on a table and imitate a goose. Another might try to beatbox with his armpit, and someone always tried to dance on a barrel. Results varied. The fool. Your medieval wedding comedian. In wealthier weddings, there was often a court jester or fool, dressed in bright clothes, wearing bells, and trained to crack jokes, imitate important guests, make people laugh at themselves, tease the in-laws, pretend to be the bishop, and maybe perform a dirty limerick. Fools were like medieval stand-up comics, but with more physical comedy and fewer microphones. A good one could make or break the mood. Games and mischief. After everyone was full, tipsy, and slightly overheated, the games began. Guessing games, dice or card games for those who could afford cards, mock sword fights with sticks or turnips, roasting competitions, where guests insulted each other for fun. In peasant weddings, things got especially silly. People wore animal masks, chased chickens, or played catch the pig in the mud. In noble circles, guests might hold riddling contests, where the loser had to sing a song, or kiss someone's donkey. When the music got romantic as the night wore on and the fire burned low, the songs changed, the beats slowed, the lights dimmed. Well, the candles melted. People started pairing off for quiet, swaying dances, the medieval version of a slow jam. Lovers snuck into corners. Courting couples whispered over ale. Someone probably declared their love under the stars, only to forget it by morning. Meanwhile, the musicians kept playing, sometimes all night long. Poor things. The drunk uncle moment. It wasn't a proper wedding without a very loud toast. No one understood a solo dance that defied rhythm and gravity, and someone, usually an uncle, falling into a firewood pile while singing about turnip Sevron, laughed, helped him up, handed him more ale, and carried on, because weddings were for joy and chaos. How long did it all last? Sometimes just a day, sometimes 3 days straight, especially if the family had money. The guests traveled from far away. The ale supply was suspiciously endless. By the end, people were out of breath, out of tune, out of clean clothes, but full of stories, bruises, and leftover stew. In summary, medieval wedding entertainment was a partager. There were no disco balls, no electric guitars, no karaoke machines, praise be, but there was lively music, dancing for everyone, a few fart jokes, and more laughter than you'd expect from a world where plumbing didn't exist. For one night, people forgot about taxes, plagues, and sore feet. They danced, they laughed, they toasted love, even if it was arranged by their dads. Not bad, all things considered. Bedding ceremonies? Yep, that was a thing. So, you feasted. You've danced until your ankles hurt. You've watched a drunk uncle try to juggle bread rolls. The music is fading. The candles are flickering ... and now it's time for what might be the strangest part of a medieval wedding. The bedding ceremony? Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. And yes, it was weird. Let's tiptoe into one of the most awkward wedding traditions ever invented. What was a bedding ceremony? Exactly. It was a public event, sort of, where the newlyweds were escorted to bed by a crowd of friends and family, cheering, laughing, sometimes singing, the whole point to make the marriage official, not just with words or blessings, but with action. In many places, a marriage wasn't truly complete until the couple had, let's say, consummated it, and people took that very seriously. Why was it such a big deal? Two main reasons: legal stuff. In medieval Europe, especially under church law, consummating the marriage made it binding. Like, no take-backs, inheritance, and legitimacy. Families wanted to be sure the marriage was real so that any future kids were considered legitimate. No funny business, no excuses, no annulments. So naturally, someone had the bright idea. Let's make it a group event. Step-by-step awkward measures how a traditional bedding ceremony might go. The crowd gathers. Everyone knows it's time. The torches are lit. The mood is weirdly festive. The couple is led to the bed, usually in the bride's house or the groom's chamber. Guests walk with them, sometimes singing bawdy songs. They get undressed, with help? Yep. In some places, attendants or bridesmaids helped undress the bride. Groomsmen might strip the groom. It was supposed to be symbolic. But still, into the bed they go, fully naked or in a nightshirt, under the covers. Guests throw coins, flowers, or in some cases, nuts. Why? No one knows. The curtain closes if you're lucky. Some beds had curtains. Some didn't. Some people stayed in the room, others left. Depends how nosy your uncle was. The priest might bless the bed? Yes, a real thing. May your loins be fruitful, or something equally charming. Cheering, more songs. Then finally, privacy, sort of. Occasionally someone stayed behind to listen for proof. Yep, we told you this was awkward. Did people actually watch? Not always, but sometimes. Yes. In some cultures, it was expected for witnesses, often two or more, to physically be there when the couple got into bed. They didn't have to see everything, but they were supposed to make sure the couple was cooperating. In royal weddings, it could get even more dramatic. A whole audience of nobles, special bedding clothes, applause when the couple kissed. Good night. Imagine your wedding night being treated like the Super Bowl halftime show. No pressure. How the couple felt about it: some were into it. Some were very much not. New brides, especially, might be young, sometimes barely teens, nervous. For obvious reasons, marrying a stranger, yikes, but it wasn't all doom and gloom. Some couples were excited, especially if they'd been betrothed for years. And in peasant weddings, the whole thing might be more playful than formal, a mix of teasing, laughter, and tossing someone onto a straw mattress. Bedding traditions. Around Europe and every region did it the same way. In England, the priest might lead the couple to the bed. Guests would chant blessings and jokes. The mother-in-law might stick around awkwardly. In France, bedding was sometimes treated like a parade. There were songs, many about what was coming next. In Scandinavia, the bride and groom might drink a final toast in bed. Guests left only after hearing certain noise. In Germany, guests might lock the door and guard it until morning, because nothing says romance like 12 drunk relatives outside your room. Not just about the bedroom. Semites, the bedding ceremony was used for proving virginity, marking alliances between families, bragging rights. Yep. The groom might emerge the next morning with a goofy grin and a full breakfast. It was less about love and more about social proof. Look, we did it. Our families are joined. Now, give us goats. When things got messy, not every bedding went smoothly. Sometimes, one person refused. The couple fought. Bad sign. Someone tried to sneak out of the marriage before things got ... Physical in those cases, the marriage might be annulled, or someone's honor was called into question, or someone got stabbed. It was medieval times. After all, when the church got involved, church officials had mixed feelings. Some supported bedding ceremonies, even attending themselves. Others thought it was indecent, too much noise, not enough holiness. Eventually, some priests tried to make the tradition more modest. No nudity, no singing, no listening behind doorstep, as you might guess. People still partied anyway. The morning after, if all went well, the couple woke up married in every sense. Sometimes there was a special breakfast with more wine, guests bringing gifts or clothes, a proof sheet shown off. We'll spare you the details, and just like that, the ceremony was over. The couple was now expected to start a household, make babies, and probably plow something by noon. In summary, a ceremony you definitely didn't ask for. Medieval bedding ceremony was loud, public, wildly uncomfortable by today's standards, and yet ... kind of sweet. In a very strange way, it wasn't about passion. It was about community, witnessing, and making sure the marriage counted. Today, couples get Instagram likes. Back then, you got flower petals, a priest, and 10 people watching you climb into bed. Medieval romance, gotta love it. Gifts, dowries, and who owed what to whom. So, you made it through the ceremony. You got married in front of your entire village. You survived the feasting, the dancing, and the bedding ceremony. Now comes the part that really mattered to the families: the stuff, land, money, livestock, clothes, utensils, bonus sheep, all the goodies that came with tying the knot. In the medieval world, marriage wasn't just a union of souls. It was an economic contract, and oh boy, was it full of strings. Let's talk dowries. Yes, they were a big deal in many parts of medieval Europe. A dowry was the centerpiece of the marriage deal. A dowry was property or money brought by the bride to her husband when they married. It was like, here's your new wife. Also, 3 cows and a silver goblet. You're welcome. The dowry could include land, coins, jewelry, household goods, plates, bedding, that one nice chair, livestock, clothes, tools, a small army of geese. Yes, sometimes, why was the dowry so important? Security for the bride. In case the husband died or ran off, the dowry was often meant to support the wife. Like a medieval insurance policy. Social status. A bigger dowry meant higher social standing. Families used dowries to climb the social ladder, or at least grab the next rung. Marriage negotiations. Dowries could make or break a marriage deal. If you didn't have one, your daughter might be left unwed. Or worse, married off to that guy with one eyebrow and a drinking problem. Who paid it? Usually the bride's father or family paid the dowry. If the family was broke, they might borrow money, offer land instead of cash, or send the daughter to a convent less expensive than marriage. Oddly enough, in some regions, the groom's family had to match the dowry with the bride price, a gift given to the bride's family to even things out. Confused? Yeah, medieval marriage was like playing Monopoly with livestock. What about gifts from the groom? Grooms weren't off the hook. In many traditions, the groom gave a morning gift or dower, something he gave his new wife after the wedding night. The idea was, thanks for the wedding and everything else. Here's a small estate. The dower could be a piece of land, a house, a chest of coins, or, if the groom was cheap, maybe just a promise. Saying noble marriages, the dower was written into legal documents. No takes, ies backsized. Wedding gifts from guests didn't show up empty-handed either. Depending on your social circle, you might get cloth, very useful, salt, a luxury, cups, pans, or ladles, more dishes, wine, always welcome, bread or pastries, maybe even a piglet. Nobles might exchange gifts of serious value, like hunting dogs, horses, swords, rare books for those who could read. Peasants, usually, gave what they could, sometimes a shared gift from the whole village. Dowry drama. When things went sideways, of course, Money complicates everything. Some examples of classic medieval dowry drama. The dowry was never delivered, the groom didn't give the promised dower, the bride ran off with her dowry scandal. The family lied about what was in the chest someone's uncle tried to steal. The silver plate sand, once the marriage happened. Getting the dowry back was tricky, especially if things went sour. Courts were full of disputes over who owns what sheep now. Rich versus poor marriages. A huge gap. Let's say you were a noble family. Your daughter's dowry might include a fortified manor house, a small forest, several servants, 300 gold coins, an embroidered veil worth more than a peasant's house bed if you were a peasant, a single goat, a good wool blanket to spoons, and a pot with only some cracks. Still, even small gifts mattered. They helped the new couple start life with something, anything, to their name. Keeping track, marriage contracts for wealthier families, all this stuff was written down. Marriage contracts were serious business. A local priest or notary would draw up an agreement saying what the bride brings, what the groom gives, what happens if someone dies, who keeps what if it all falls apart. It was like medieval prenups, but with more Latin and worse handwriting. Dowries as lever gears where it gets spicy. Sometimes, the bride's family used the dowry as leverage. If you mistreat our daughter, we're taking the land back. No babies in 3 years, we want our horse returned. Insult us in public. Kiss your wine cellar goodbye. In some cases, the church or local lord got involved. They had a say in dowries and inheritances, especially among the rich, because, again, marriage was business, and business was serious. Love, optional. Livestock, required. It's easy to romanticize medieval weddings, candles, lace, long veils, dramatic speeches. But the truth, marriage was often less about butterflies and more about barnyards. Your feelings mattered less than your assets. Love was a bonus. Getting married without a dowry was like showing up to poker night with no cards. In summary, a beautiful union of two people and a lot of stuffers. What we learned: dowries equals brides, contribution. Dowers equals grooms. Thank you. Gift. Guests gave things like geese and spoons. Everything had a purpose. Even the itchy wool cloak. Money, land, and goods equals glue that held marriages together. Was it romantic? Not always. Was it practical? Extremely. At the end of the day, a medieval marriage was a team effort between two people and two entire families. And a surprising number of farm animals. Noble versus peasant weddings, a world apart. Let's face it, not all medieval weddings were equal. Some had music, gold rings, and entire roasted deer. Others had turnips, mud, and your aunt yelling at the neighbor's goat. In this chapter, we're diving into the two very different worlds of noble weddings and peasant weddings, and how everything from clothes to ceremonies to leftovers could vary wildly, depending on your status, to classes, to religious. In medieval Europe, your social class determined just about everything: what you wore, where you lived, how much you ate, and yes, what kind of wedding you go to. If you were a noble, your wedding was a big, formal, political event. It was often arranged years in advance and involved lots of parchment, politics, and pressure. If you were a peasant, your wedding was simpler, more local, and probably involved fewer pigs, but also more fun. Noble weddings, status, strategy, and a lot of meat for nobles. Marriage was rarely about love. It was about alliances, land power, and making sure your family name didn't vanish into history like a forgotten bread roll. These weddings could take months to plan and included negotiations between families, contracts about land and dowries, priests, bishops, even royal approval if you were important enough. And sometimes the bride and groom barely knew each other. They might be kids, or second cousins, or both. What did a noble wedding look like? Imagine this: a castle or cathedral decked out with flowers, tapestries, and candles, guests in silk, fur, and gold threaded tunics, church bells ringing for hours, a priest in full robes, reciting Latin blessings while everyone pretends to understand pages, and squires holding swords and torches. A feast with entire animals on the table: boars, swans, peacocks, with their feathers reattached for style. In the wedding beds were fancy canopy curtains, velvet sheets, and people watching you get in. So romantic. What did nobles eat? Food at a noble wedding could include roasted deer, goose, or peacock meat pies the size of a toddler, spiced wine and sweet ale, cheese and honey, fruit tarts, dishes shaped like castles or mythical creatures. Just because there was a lot of food, but there was also a lot of watching people eat if you were lower status. Not everyone got a seat at the fancy table. Peasant weddings? Simple, sweet, and muddy. Let's switch lanes. If you were a peasant, your wedding probably happened in a churchyard, at a local tavern, or even at your front door. No big contracts, no noble bishops, no 20-course meals. Just a people saying yes in front of friends, family, and probably that one cow that always wandered over. What did a peasant wedding look like? Picture this: clothes cleaned for the occasion, maybe even borrowed. A flower crown made by your cousin, a priest from the village giving a short blessing, everyone throwing oats or rice if they had any to spare. Then music, dancing, and drinking in the fields or common hall. Vibe was joyful, chaotic, and very human. And hey, no one was judging your turnip stew. What did peasants eat? Peasant wedding meals were humble but heartfelt. Bread, always bread, stews with root vegetables, whatever meat was available. Maybe pork, maybe rabbit, maybe none. A few jugs of ale, berries, or honeyed oats if someone was feeling fancy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was plenty for the village, and the leftovers didn't go to waste. Who was invited? For nobles, other nobles, church officials, political allies, musicians, and entertainers. That one night, who always shows up uninvited? For peasants, your entire village, your livestock. Unofficially, whoever was free that day. Difference: noble weddings were exclusive. Peasant weddings were basically a big block party with fewer shoes, ceremonies, and traditions. Noble ceremonies had ring exchanges, witnesses from important families, Latin prayers and blessings, official record keeping with seals. Peasant ceremonies had hand-holding, verbal vows, I'll have thee and hold thee style, local customs like jumping over a broom, sharing ale, or walking around a ferretta. Friend traditions, same goal, get married, try not to trip. Clothing, silk versus wool, noble brides might wear velvet dresses with fur trim, embroidered sleeves, gold-threaded belts, decorative veils, and jewels. Shoes that screamed, I've never worked a day in my life. Peasant brides wore their best dress, likely wool, a floral crown or ribbon in the hair, clean shoes, or barefoot, and if lucky, something borrowed from a richer cousin. Both looked beautiful in their own way, but one cost more than your house. Happily ever after. Married life was different. Noble wives might manage estates, host feasts, and handle servants, but also be used as political pawns. Peasant wives worked a lot. They cooked, cleaned, gardened, raised kids, helped in the fields, and maybe even brewed beer. But both noble and peasant couples faced real pressures: survival, disease, childbirth, the occasional Viking raid. For earlier centuries, one big difference, and one big similarity. Biggest gap between noble and peasant weddings was wealth and formality. But the biggest similarity: they both involved families, communities, and a shared hope that this new life together would somehow work out, whether you had gold goblets or clay mugs, silk gowns or potato-stained aprons, a 5-course feast or a single stew pot. You were part of something big, something sacred, something, honestly, very stressful. Marriage, forbidden love, and secret marriages. *, not all medieval love stories ended with flower crowns and church bells. Some ended with angry fathers, hidden doorways, and vows whispered in the dark. Welcome to the world of forbidden love and secret marriages, where people broke the rules, followed their hearts, and usually got into a lot of trouble for it. Why was love forbidden in the first place? In medieval times, There were a lot of reasons you couldn't just marry whoever you wanted. Let's go down the list. Wrong social class. Nope. Different religion. Definitely nope. No permission from your lord, bishop, or dad. Still nope. To closely related. Big nope. Wanted to marry for love instead of politics. Nice try. Marriage wasn't just personal, it was political, economic, and social. So, if you tried to go rogue and marry someone your family or community didn't approve of, you were risking scandal, exile, or even excommunication. Runaway brides and grooms, one classic move. Eloping. To people in love, running off to a different village or town where nobody knew their names, hoping to find a sympathetic priest or a drunk one. Did it work? Sometimes, but often, someone's uncle came looking with a sword and a very dramatic monologue. It wasn't just about love, it was about property, inheritance, and honor. You mess with that, you mess with everyone's future. Secret ceremony. If you wanted to marry in secret, you didn't need much, just a verbal exchange of consent, maybe a couple of witnesses or not. If you were being really sneaky, boom, you were married. At least technically. That's because in the early medieval period, a spoken vow was enough to count as a valid marriage, especially if you sealed it with, let's say, physical confirmation. The church didn't love this, but it happened all the time. Hand fasting and backyard vows before the church tightened its grip. Hand fasting was a common tradition, where couples would clasp hands and swear to be together, often outside or at home. It wasn't official, but it felt real. And for people who couldn't afford a priest, or didn't want one, this was the best option. Sometimes it was the only option. Lords and ladies, falling in love with the wrong people. Nobles weren't immune to forbidden love. In fact, they might have had it worse. If you were a lord's daughter, your marriage was probably arranged when you were still playing with wooden dolls. Fall in love with a stable boy. Scandal. Get caught sneaking kisses with your night squire. Scandal and exile. Sometimes these secret romances turned into full-on dramas. Letters hidden in hay bales, meetings in the garden at midnight, entire ballads written about the heartbreak when it all went wrong. Think of it as medieval soap opera, but with more armor and fewer happy endings. When the church stepped in, church had a complicated relationship with secret marriages. On one hand, it said, marriage is sacred, consent matters. If two people vow themselves to each other freely, that's enough. On the other hand, please stop doing it without a priest and some paperwork. By the 12th and 13th centuries, church leaders were pushing for more structure. Marriages should happen in public, with a priest, in front of witnesses, and ideally, without scandal. But of course, people still found ways around it. Clerical crushes and monastery love letters. You might think monks, nuns, and priests didn't get into romantic messes. Oh, friend, they absolutely did. Despite vows of chastity and rules against marriage, forbidden relationships among clergy were surprisingly common. There are records of priests secretly living with housekeepers, monks falling in love with nuns in neighboring convents, secret children being raised by cousins they weren't supposed to fall in love. But sometimes, they did, and they were very bad at hiding it. Cross-class love. A medieval long shot. Let's say you were a peasant and fell in love with a noble. What then? Short answer, nothing good. You'd likely be separated. Your love interest might be sent off to marry someone with better land. You could lose your job, your home, or worse, be accused of trying to rise above your station. But still, the stories survived. Ballads, poems, and legends are full of cross-class romances, tragic, doomed, and weirdly romantic. Famous medieval love gone wrong. Let's talk about Abelard and Heloise, basically the medieval Romeo and Juliet, but with more Latin and fewer sword fights. Abelard was a famous philosopher. Heloise was his brilliant student. They fell in love, secretly married, had a child, and then her uncle found out. It didn't end well. Abelard was permanently injured. Use your imagination. They were separated and became a monk and a nun, but they wrote letters to each other for years, full of love, regret, and longing. Forbiddance. Yes. Beautiful. Also yes. Good idea. Definitely not. Punishments for secret love depending on where you lived. Getting married in secret could get you fined, excommunicated, publicly shamed, disowned by your family, kicked out of your guild, village, or noble house, or forced to annul the marriage altogether. Still, people did it, because medieval or not, love tends to do what it wants. Sometimes it worked out. Not every forbiddance love ended in disaster. There were couples who eloped and built a new life, married in secret, and later made it official, defied the odds, and stayed together through war, famine, and nosy neighbors. It wasn't common, but it happened, and maybe that's why these stories still make us sigh a little. Because even in a world of arranged marriages and angry bishops, some people still follow their hearts. What could go wrong? A lot. Actually, asterisk. So you've made it to the big day. The dress or tunic is on, the priest is ready, and the roast pig is sizzling in the background. What could possibly go wrong? Well, this is the Middle Ages. A lot could go wrong. Weddings were messy, chaotic, political, awkward, and occasionally violent. So let's take a sleepy little stroll through all the ways a medieval wedding could fall apart, before, during, and after the do. Problem number 1. Someone didn't want it to happen at all. Medieval marriages were love matches. Okay, most weren't, but even arranged marriages could get complicated. Sometimes, one party, the bride, really didn't want to go through with it. But guess what? That didn't always matter. Still, resistance happened. A bride might run away, a groom might disappear mysteriously the night before, a parent might withdraw consent at the last second, or a bishop might step in and say, actually, no, church law required both people to consent freely. But powerful families had a way of encouraging that consent, with threats, money, or the promise of a new goat. Problem number 2. Too closely related. Here's a fun one. Medieval people were really big on not marrying your cousin, unless you were royalty. The church had very specific rules about consanguinity. Basically, you couldn't marry anyone within 7 degrees of relation. That's a lot of people when your village is tiny. So imagine getting halfway through the ceremony and realizing, wait, didn't we share a great-grandma? Oops, marriage denied, unless you were noble. In that case, you just got the Pope to write you a special little permission slip, and everything was fine. Problem number 3. Dowry. Germano dowry. No deal. That was the rule in many places. If the bride's family couldn't cough up enough goods, land, or livestock, the marriage could be postponed or canceled altogether. Sometimes dowries were paid in installments, like a medieval layaway plan. But if a payment was missed, the groom's family might walk away and take the party food with them. Problem number 4. The priest didn't show up. Not every village had a priest on standby. And sometimes, the one you did have was busy, sick, away, drunk, or just didn't feel like it. Without a priest, a church wedding couldn't happen. Sure, you could go ahead with a private vow, but it wouldn't be official. So couples sometimes stood around awkwardly, hoping someone would ride to the next town and find father what single quotes as his name. This is why spontaneous backyard weddings were weirdly common. Problem number 5. Someone objected loudly. You know the bit in modern weddings where the officiant says, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." Yeah, that really mattered in medieval times. People could actually stand up during the ceremony and object, for real reasons like, he's already married their cousins, she was promised to someone else. This is against canon law. If someone made a legit claim, the wedding could be paused or canceled while the church sorted it out. Nothing says romance like legal investigations mid-ceremony. Problem number 6. Surprise groom swappies. This actually happened. In rare cases, someone else would show up pretending to be the groom. Maybe a brother, maybe a suitor from long ago, maybe someone the bride's father preferred, and if the groom hadn't shown his face around town in a while, nobody might notice, until it was too late. There are even stories of women realizing they married the wrong guy only after the wedding night. Yikes. Problem number 7. Fight at the feast. Weddings were supposed to be joyful, but let's be honest, you gather dozens or hundreds of people, throw in lots of ale, and start handing out food unevenly, and yeah, things could get tense. Typical feast day problems. Someone insulted someone's family, a noble stepped on a peasant's foot, too much wine plus bad dancing equals disaster. Someone thought their gift wasn't appreciated enough, the food ran out before Uncle Henry got his second helping. Sometimes it ended in a brawl, or worse, a full-blown family feud that lasted generations. Problem number 8. Betting ceremony fails. If the local custom required a public betting ceremony, yes, still weird, there were high stakes involved. What if the couple refused? One of them ran away. Things didn't go as expected. This wasn't just awkward, it could cast doubt on the marriage itself. Witnesses were supposed to see or hear something that confirmed consummation. If not, well, let the rumors begin. Problem number 9. Death before thy due. Morbid, but true. Medieval life was unpredictable and full of sudden illness, injuries, and wars. There are stories of grooms dying in battle before returning home, brides falling ill just days before the wedding, one partner never making it to the church at all. In some heartbreaking cases, dowries were returned or given in the form of funeral goods. Problem number 10. The church changed its mind even after a wedding. The church might decide the marriage was invalid. Reasons included not enough witnesses, one partner already married, consanguinity again with the cousins, not consummating the marriage, getting married during a prohibited holy season. If your marriage was annulled, it was like it never happened. Except emotionally, it definitely happened, and yet they kept getting married despite all the chaos. People still tied the knot. Over and over again, across centuries and continents, people found love, or duty, or survival, and said, let's do this. Sometimes it went wrong. Sometimes it went very, very wrong. But sometimes it actually worked. Which brings us to the next chapter. After the wedding, married life begins. So the wedding is over. The guests have stumbled home. The feast table is empty, except for a half-eaten pie and a minstrel snoring under it. The bedding ceremony, if there was one, is done. Maybe. Let's not talk about it. Now comes the part that medieval songs don't sing much about. Married life. It wasn't all roses and romance. In fact, it was more like chores, kids, cows, and survival. But it was life, and for many couples, this was when the real story started. Step 1. Move in or not. In some cases, newlyweds didn't even get a place of their own, especially peasants. If the groom was a younger son, he might still live with his parents. If the bride came from a big family, the couple might squeeze into a shared cottage with her siblings, grandparents, and about 6 chickens. Privacy. That was a fantasy. Among nobles, it was a little fancier. There might be a manor house or estate waiting. But even then, there were expectations. The new bride was suddenly expected to run a household like a mini CEO, whether she knew how or not. Daily life. Wake up, work, repeat. Medieval marriage wasn't about candlelit dinners and long walks in the garden. It was about getting up at dawn, feeding animals, tending crops, brewing beer, making clothes, mending things, and surviving the plague. If possible, husbands and wives worked together, side by side. In a peasant household, the wife might bake bread while the husband plowed. Or the other way around, if needed. In noble homes, the labor was more administrative, but no less demanding. The lady of the house managed servants, planned supplies, and oversaw the estate when her husband was off fighting or hunting or doing whatever lords did all day. Who was in charge? Technically, the husband. The medieval church and law both said the man was the head of the household. The wife was supposed to obey, be chaste, and keep the home. In practice, It really depended. Strong-willed women often ran things behind the scenes, and if the husband was lazy, sick, or just not very bright, the wife could become the de facto leader of the house. Quietly, of course, among peasants, it was often just a partnership. Survival didn't care much about gender roles. Kids. Lots of kids. Children were a central part of medieval marriage. Not because they were cute, though some probably were, but because they were workers' heirs, and your only shot at retirement. Families needed children to help in the fields, carry on the family name, and care for parents in old age, but infant mortality was high. Many children didn't survive past the age of 5, so couples often had a lot of children, not out of luxury, but necessity. Having 10 kids didn't mean you had a big, happy family. It meant you hoped some would make it. Love. Eventually so. Was there love? Sometimes? Yes, some medieval couples truly fell in love, before or after the wedding. Letters from noble couples sometimes show real affection. Peasant spouses who worked together closely often developed strong bonds. Other marriages were cold, distant, or purely practical, just a people surviving together. Romantic love wasn't expected at first, but it might grow over time, quietly, under layers of hard work and routine. A shared joke, a warm look, a moment of calm after a hard day. Medieval love stories weren't flashy, but they could be real. Conflict. Of course, marriages weren't perfect. There were arguments over money, food, in-laws, and who forgot to feed the pig again. Abuse and neglect happened, and in many cases, there wasn't much a spouse could do. To escape a bad marriage, divorce, in the modern sense, wasn't really an option. The church allowed annulment in rare cases, but not for unhappiness. Some couples separated informally. Others just tolerated each other for life, but many made it work, with patience, routine, and maybe a bit of stubborn loyalty. Widowhood and remarriage life was short. If your spouse died, which was likely, given wars, childbirth, disease, and accidents, you didn't necessarily stay single. Remarriage was common, especially for women with young children to support or dowries to protect. A widow might find herself married again within a year. Love had little to do with it. Survival did. And with each new marriage came a new beginning, new homes, new family ties, and possibly new drama. Marriage as survival strategy. In the end, marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't just about two people. It was about families, alliances, economics, and getting through life without starving or freezing. A good marriage was like a well-made wagon, sometimes rickety, occasionally off balance, but if both people held on tight, it could carry them a long way, and that's kind of beautiful. In a muddy, medieval sort of way, the end of the wedding to Lesso. There you have it. From awkward proposals and goat-based dowries, to candle-lit ceremonies and bedding disasters, to daily life filled with chores and the occasional pig-stealing neighbor. Medieval marriage was a whole experience. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. Just like today, people hoped for partnership, for stability, maybe even love. And sometimes, they actually found it. Now that's a bedtime story worth dreaming about.